Welcome to episode 15 of The Art of Warfare. This is Taugrim, and today we review the PL-01, the Tier 10 Polish light tank that was released in patch 0.15. If you're like a lot of players, you're probably trying to sort out which Tier 10s to get first, and I think the PL-01 should receive strong consideration for being one of the top two that you get first. It is my favorite tank to play for a lot of reasons. It has incredible gun handling, and it's very agile and has a pretty solid armor profile. And on top of that, it also has unusually good camo, so you can do some brawling with it, you can spot with it. It's very mobile, so it's good for flanking and flexing, and it's just like, it's such a joy to drive. It's the most fun tank to drive in the game that I've played. So let's take a look at the stats, since they are very solid. The armor piercing penetration is a very solid 767, and the alpha damage with Chrome Barrel Lining 3 mounted is 652, so the gun packs some pretty solid punch. The hit points are just a hair under 3k if you slot Internal Hull Reinforcement Mark 3, and the armor is composite, and it's pretty bouncy and it's very angled, so if opponents are not properly aiming at you or you're doing a good job wiggling, they're going to miss your pretty obvious weak spots. The limitations of this tank in terms of mobility, the top end speed is pretty lackluster at about 70 kilometers per hour, and you can slot improved filter systems to boost that up over 75 kilometers an hour. That's what I did once I got the retrofit unlocked. And the forward acceleration is very good, but the reverse speed is actually not very good, so it's sluggish to get out of a bad situation. The camouflage is an unusually high, over 0.40 if you have either Sabrina or Aaron as the commander and you've got the camouflage paint. I prefer Sabrina over Aaron because the trade-off is view range versus accuracy, and this gun already has stellar accuracy and gun handling. The cannon depression is maximum of -8, which is pretty good. It allows you to play hull down and protect some pretty obvious weak spots on your hull. And the gun handling, like I said, is really good. Even with just a tier 3 crew, if you've got both accuracy retrofits slotted, you're looking at a 0.03 accuracy, which is really good for hitting weak spots. And the amount of bloom on the aiming reticle when you're driving, it's pretty tight, like even if you're going at pretty solid speed. So let's look at the weak spots. The upper hull is very strong, with the exception of the strip right at the very top of the hull where there are vents and a driver's hatch. And then the main weak spot is this area here, that upper part of the lower plate, which is, for tier 10, this area is really huge for weak spots, so you want to be careful. It is pretty well protected against shape charge such as heat, although you can still get penned on the top part of the hull there, like in the driver's hatch, by people firing shape charge ammo. The gunner's sight on the turret is a weak spot that's very easy to penetrate, but since the turret is unmanned, you take reduced damage. Now, looking at the side of the tank, it's well protected against shape charge because of the composite armor and the spaced armor. However, once we switch to armor piercing, you can see that a lot of the front half of the tank, even from this modest angle, is all green. So it's very easy to penetrate the side of this tank. And you know, if you see a PL-01 coming at you, you can just punch it through the front drive wheel, and that's pretty much a guaranteed penetration. So let's look at some combat footage. This is Ghost Field, and since I have a really good view range of 465, I can sit here, which is a pretty common spotting area for AFVs, and as soon as that tier 10 Chalet entered my white circle, that's my view range, I lit him up immediately. And then what's interesting is that I spotted an enemy PL-01 who didn't spot me and still isn't spotting me even after I fire. So I think, you know, the benefit of having either Sabrina or Aaron as your commander to boost your camo, and your camo before you fire and your camo after you fire, and the ability to spot them further away, it's pretty meaningful. You know, this tank can definitely bully AFVs, and if the enemy team either doesn't have any AFVs or their AFVs are dead, you can outspot pretty much anything else you're going to see in the match, and that's a really big advantage. You know, the really funny thing about light tanks in this game is that they're not really good at spotting. Generally speaking, you have to be opportunistic and operate as a flanker, but because the PL-01 has such good camouflage, you can spot pretty effectively and reduce the view range of people trying to spot you. Now, in this particular battle, there's a pretty good PL-01 platoon on the other side, and I know those players are going to wolf back together since I fought them in a previous battle, so I'm waiting for my friendly PL-01 to come down here so that we can move together. the PL-01, you know, it's misplayed by players in much the same way that the VFM is, just as I talked about back in episode 13, where people force the armor to save them and they try to brawl in situations where it doesn't make sense. And in this tank, even though the frontal armor profile is pretty solid, if you try to go toe-to-toe, face-to-face with an MBT that is driven by a comparably skilled driver, the MBT will wreck your face. They've got much smaller weak spots, they have their guns hit harder, they have more hit points to work with, and their armor is going to be a lot more reliable. This isn't to say that this tank can't brawl, it's just like with the VFM, you don't want to force it into situations where you have to brawl or where your armor has to save you or you're relying on the other person to miss you because you're misusing the armor. And, you know, just as the VFM has a really obvious weak spot of the entire turret to AP, frontally speaking, you know, this tank has that really large upper half of the lower plate, which is very easy to penetrate. So the opposing PL-01 platoon has been spotted. They're pressuring a Ramka, and I was hoping to come over here and get some shots out across the water, but they are behind a building, and I'm not going to get a shot. We do have a T-90 MS that's pretty close to us that I spotted earlier, and our friendly PL-01 is engaging him, so I want to come around. One thing you want to avoid, I almost drove on the inside of the lake, and that's really dangerous because if you get spotted, there is no meaningful hardcover to work with. So I come into the safety of this urban canyon, and I've been spotted, that's fine. I'm rushing up to support my friendly PL-01, and I take a snapshot there on the Ariete. That doesn't penetrate, but I don't want to be too passive here. I want to keep using my gun off reload, and you can see how awesome that accuracy is, even on the move, you know, how laser-like it was when I fired on the Ariete with the second shot. And their PL-01 platoon is rushing down this way, and they're already spotted. So I got the first shot advantage, landed a penetrating shot, and then popped smokes immediately to help prevent that opposing player from targeting me successfully. And then that shot there against the second PL-01, I should have been aiming a little bit higher. At the time of this video, I didn't realize exactly where that strip is. It's very large, and then again, like once I get that green area, go ahead and fire. And, you know, because this tank doesn't have very good reverse speed, I'm being very careful about not getting too close to the PL-01s. I was waiting for our MBTs to come rushing down the E-line, so they have successfully killed one of the PL-01s. We've got a numbers advantage, so this PL-01's not ready, and I punch him through the side, and then I make a mistake. The better thing I should have done in hindsight after firing on him is just push forward toward him and wiggle my tank and force him to make a good shot, because when I fired and then tried to back up around the corner, I allowed him an easy snapshot on the side of my hull armor, which, you know, as we saw earlier with the weak spots, is really easy to hit. That being said, you can see by just simply wiggling the tank, driving backwards away from opponents, you can try to force him into a tough shot, hitting the upper part of that lower plate. You know, in an ideal world, if you can play hull down, or if there's some, you know, hard cover that you can work with and you can just show only the, you know, upper part of your front hull, you're reasonably well protected. That being said, the PL-01 has such good agility, you know, not necessarily good top end speed, but it can accelerate really quickly and it turns like butter, and that's part of the fun of driving this tank. I'm trying to wait until, or try to spot where their MBTs are. So we spotted the T-90 MS. There's still the question of where the last T-90 is, and then he's spotted down along the D line. So we do have a one tank advantage, and what I want to do, I intentionally didn't go with the other MBTs because I want to try to keep tabs on where the enemy tanks are and then flank them once they're engaged with our MBTs. Now, that 2A6 is a tier 9 MBT, but I don't want to have anything to do with getting into a frontal brawl with him because his driver's hatch weak spot is way smaller than, you know, the weak spots that I have on the front hull of my tank. So I don't want to force myself into a brawl unless I have to do it. But what I can do, since this Armada is both tracked and facing the other direction, this is going to allow me to put in the last two kill shots. And the Armada really can't do anything. Even if he wasn't tracked and he tried to turn to face me, all he'd be doing is giving my friendly 2A6, who's now engaged with another Leo, easy side shots. And of course, you know, if the Armada did start to turn, I can drive around him and buy time. It is important to also note that the PL-01 doesn't have sufficient circling speed to defeat the hull traverse of an MBT. Right there was a little trick. I ran that Leo 2A6 to track him and then, you know, got an easy side shot to finish him off. And then the jackhouse on my team actually shot me. I was wondering like what the heck he was doing that for, and then I just remembered in the match before this I had like a huge 8,000 damage carry in my M1A1 and I killed that guy and I helped carry us back to a win in a battle we honestly should have lost. So he's probably still a little butthurt. I don't know. People do ridiculous things. Let's look at the scorecard. 6,200 damage, 4 kills, 6 spots, and this was good for about 2,000 damage more than any other player on my team. And this is part of what the PL-01 is good for. It can spot reasonably well. It's a good flanker. The gun handling is amazing, and I managed to bounce 1,800 damage, bouncing 3 shots, but still delivering 4 to those 4 or 5 shots of those PL-01s. I think 5 shots. And that's why, for a number of reasons, this tank is just so mechanically sound, and it's really fun to drive. I don't think that it's overpowered, at least based on the current tier 10 meta. We'll have to see how that develops, especially when the TDs are introduced. I have some really good footage of the M1A1, BMD4, and Typhoon, so let me know which of those 3 tanks you'd be interested in seeing next, and let me know your comments and feedback for this video. Take care.